Welcome back to another episode of the Live Life Longer show, where we discuss longevity, anti-aging practices, biohacking, having more energy, and living a happier, healthier life. In today's episode, we're discussing something that we all use and consume on a daily basis, and that's water. We know that water can come in three different forms, which is solid or ice, liquid, and vapor. But did you know that there is actually a fourth phase of water? I interviewed Dr. Gerald Pollack, the man that discovered the fourth phase of water, known as easy water. Easy water is a special type of water that forms in your cells. It's like a charged battery. It stores energy and can deliver that energy to cells that need it. It also makes your mitochondria stronger, so you can produce more energy. In addition, it also acts as an antioxidant, protecting you from stress and slowing down aging, and it improves protein folding across your whole body, which makes you more resilient to stress and speeds up recovery. Gerald Pollack received his PhD in Biomedical Engineering from the University of Pennsylvania in 1968. He then joined the University of Washington faculty and is now Professor of Bioengineering. He's the author of the book, The Fourth Phase of Water, Beyond Solid, Liquid, and Vapor, and the book Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. Dr. Gerald Pollack, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm delighted. It's really nice to be with you, Dan, and I'm looking forward to trying to answer a few questions that you have, and tell your listeners about what we've discovered.
Yes.
We're excited about it.
Yeah, I'm excited for our conversation, and really with the research that I've done to prep for our conversation. I know you're very well respected in your field, and the work that you're doing and all the research that you're doing, finding really fascinating stuff. And I'm just excited to kind of go into that a little bit further today. So,
well, thank you. Respected by some, but there are detractors.
I'm sure there always are.
Yeah.
There always are. So with that being said, you have really kind of made most of your life's work centered around the study of water, and you've written books about it, and you have extensive research done on water. So tell us, what was it that drew you? What was that curiosity that drew you to this field?
The curiosity actually began as you might say, a second career, because I didn't start my career studying water. Although I must admit, as a graduate student, in a department of biomedical engineering, water was a topic in that department, and most of the students were bored, not interested. I must admit, I guess I was in that category, and so I began my career for 2 or 3 decades on a different subject. We were studying the molecular mechanism of muscle contraction. How do the proteins organize themselves in muscles to create force, tension, shortening, whatever. And at the time, it was exciting because the theory that was still around, it hasn't changed practically one iota in 60 years or 70 years, which is not a powerfully supportive statement. The theory was put forth by a distinguished scientist, Sir Andrew Huxley. And Huxley he passed a few years ago. He was a member of the distinguished Huxley family, Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World and such. But Andrew Huxley was the only member of the Huxley family who won a Nobel Prize. And he won his prize for discussing the currents in membranes, and so something that could explain how nerves function, for example, and other cells. But Andrew was interested also in muscles. As a kid, he played with microscopes, and he got into the field, and he was the dominant force in the field. Unfortunately, his theory was not adequate. Or I should say, is not adequate. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying this somewhat dogmatically because many people who are listening may know that if they've read a physiology or biology book, the theory that he put forth, together with another Huxley, Hugh Huxley, who is not related, but just happened to have conveniently the same last name. Those two guys dominated the field. And practically every experiment we did, the results simply failed to fit the predictions of that theory. It just didn't work. And some of them, they just didn't fit so fundamentally that it seemed to me that the theory was actually almost a non-starter. Yet, it's in the textbooks today, and still the same critique applies. And I actually wrote a book on it in 1990. And many people in the field have the book, but almost nobody's read it. It made no impact, almost no impact. And so it wasn't exactly that I changed fields, but I got excited about water during the time that we were excitedly building a wealth of evidence that simply didn't fit the existing theory and lean toward another theory of how muscles contract. And I'm sorry I'm getting into this maybe more deeply than you've asked, but I was thrilled one day to learn something. So I basically developed a hypothesis about how muscles work in that book and some papers. And almost nobody in the field, excuse me, paid much attention to it. It was okay. And then only 4 or 5 years ago, when I became deeply immersed in water, so to speak, I did it well before that, but just a few years ago, I came across a book by Albert St. Georgi, and you probably know St. Georgi. He was a scientist, and early on, he's considered to be the father of modern biochemistry, and he too won a Nobel Prize for discovering vitamin C. And he was also interested in muscles, interested in water, and it's just a brilliant, creative scientist. And he produced a lot of little books, and I came upon one of his little books on muscle contraction. I almost fell over when I looked at the contents. His theory of muscle contraction, written more than 50 years ago on the basis of, incomplete evidence, but his brilliance. His theory is almost identical to what I suggested 50 years later. Wow. I had no idea about that until just recently. So you can imagine how much my spirits were buoyed.
Sure.
But anyway, I was getting a little bit frustrated, and I had a postdoc in my laboratory who kept telling me that water is important. I was kind of resistant to the idea water was important in muscle contraction. When you think about it, the muscle cell, like every other cell, is mostly water. So we think that by volume, water is 2/3 of the volume of most cells. And if you actually convert that into the number of molecules, the fraction of molecules, for example, you take a muscle cell and line up all the molecules in a row, more than 99 out of 100 would be water molecules.
Wow. Because
they're tiny, in order to fill that 2/3 volume requires a lot of water molecules. So the idea that water would not be involved in muscle contraction or other cells it borders on preposterous, because you're saying, hey, wait a second, 99% of the molecules don't do anything? They just sit there as a bathing medium for the more important molecules of life? Could that really be? Well, if you read a textbook on biology or physiology, that's precisely what they say. The water is essentially irrelevant. It's like the water in the bathtub that you bathe yourself. So anyway, when a colleague arrived from Hungary to work with me in the laboratory, and I picked him up at the airport after some suitcase delays and all that stuff, and his wife were sitting in the back. He said to me, you should go to Hungary. Okay, I'll go to Hungary. There's a conference, and the conference is to commemorate the life's work of a biophysicist who recently passed away. And there's a symposium in his honor. And the two subjects of the symposium were the same subjects that he studied. One of them is water and one of them is muscle. You know, at the time, I was not involved with water. He said, you represent muscle because your ideas on muscle contraction are not so dissimilar from this guy's ideas on muscle contraction.
Sure.
So I said, okay, no problem. So I fly off to Budapest, and there I meet nobody else studying muscle except me, but a dozen or so people studying water. And the most important or significant of that person was a guy named Gilbert Ling, L-I-N-G. And Gilbert comes with a history. Gilbert was chosen from the first cohort of Chinese young Chinese students to come to this country after World War II to study. So they decided they'll choose the most promising biologist, one chemist, and one physicist. So the physicist went on to win a Nobel Prize. The chemist, I'm not sure, but the biologist, Gilbert Ling, should have won 3 Nobel Prizes for his contributions, and they all thought he was the cleverest among the 3. And so the main contribution, I would say, of Gilbert is gathering evidence and writing books to suggest that inside the cell, the water was not like water in this cup. It was the molecules of the water were lined up, organized like soldiers at attention.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's not the case here. So Gilbert was at the meeting, and he presented his ideas, and along with Gilbert Ling were, as I said, a dozen or so other people who had evidence to support his point of view. See, he was not alone, and I'd actually heard of Gilbert before because both of us were in Philadelphia at the same time. I was a student, and he was a distinguished scientist, although some people thought he was a crackpot. And I remember sitting at a dinner with a friend of mine, and the friend leans over and says, "Hey, you see that Chinese guy 3 tables away? That's Gilbert Ling. Everybody thinks he's a crackpot because he thinks the water in the cell is where the molecules are all lined up instead of random. Everybody knows that they're random and such." And so anyway, so I went to this meeting, and I finally meet the distinguished or indistinguished, I don't know, undistinguished Gilbert Ling, and listening to the colleagues. And I was overwhelmed by the evidence that was presented. It was clear that this guy was really onto something.
Yeah.
But I don't trust myself. So I'm almost done. I'm sorry for.
No, you're okay. Real quick, Jerry. At what point in history was this? How long ago was this?
This is about 25 years ago.
Okay.
22 years ago, something like that.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm getting to the point. And the point is, he made a great impression. I don't trust my instinct so much, so I gave one of his books to my favorite students and postdocs to read. What do you think? They all came back to me with the same opinion. This is really, really important. And if true, it changes everything in biology. Well, it turns out, I believe it's true. Not exactly true as Gilbert presented. And if you ask me, I'll explain to you why or how. There are some real differences. But the essence of the theme that that biological water is different from water in the glass, I believe is absolutely true. And so lots of evidence for that. And we picked up on that and proceeded. But the first thing to do, after hearing the positive response from students and such, is to write a book. Why write a book if Gilbert has already written 4 books by that time, or 5 books? And the reason is that Gilbert's writing style is not amenable to common understanding. He's very good at writing for himself or writing for people with seriously advanced training in physical chemistry, can intuit some of the things that he doesn't say right up front, and that's fine. But for the average Joe like me, maybe you, I don't know, it's really an obstacle to understand.
Sure.
So I wrote that book that you mentioned, Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. That was
Uh-huh.
2001.
Okay.
As soon as it came out, of course, we had to do experiments and find out more about this. And so that's what got us started.
Yeah. Super fascinating. So what was it with the book Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life that you found you were bringing to light something different that Gilbert wasn't showing?
Well, thank you for asking. Yeah, this was a problem because it kind of brought a kind of estrangement to our relationship for a while, but
Mm-hmm.
it was repaired. I think thanks to my efforts, because
Yeah.
why should two people moving along, the same set of rails
Sure.
approximately diverge like that? So I came to understand that it was not just that the water inside the cell was organized or structured in some
Mm-hmm.
way, and different, that comes later, a little different or a lot different from what Gilbert suggested. But I went on to talk about the function of that water,
Mm.
because I knew something about biology, studying muscles and other biological functions
Mm-hmm.
over the years, and so I, I came to the conclusion. This is the second half of that book. Uh, After reviewing the literature and thinking logically, with a lot of evidence that the water plays a central role. It's not no role, it's central to everything the cell does.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it works, very simply stated, is this. When a cell is in its, let's say, quiescent state, when it's not doing anything, for
Mm-hmm.
a muscle cell that would be not contracting, the proteins are nicely lined up and the water is structured, as Gilbert says. But when a muscle contracts, all the water changes. The water changes from its initial state, which is structured. Your body is filled with this stuff, structured, to ordinary water. It undergoes a transition, an abrupt transition. And that transition allows the proteins to undergo a folding. And as you know, protein folding is how cells do their job. It's what they accomplish by the movement, folding of proteins.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both the water undergoing that change and the proteins undergoing change that allows the particular cell to do its job, whether it's a muscle cell contracting or a nerve cell conducting or transmitting or a secretory cell secreting. Doesn't matter. It's all the same. Well, I mean, system is all the same. So the water is not always structured. It goes transiently, goes from ordinarily structured to unstructured, ordinary water, where things happen, and then back again to the original state, the last transition requiring energy to put it back into that state.
Yeah.
That's
and
what's different.
Why is that important for that transition? Why is that important for our cells to go from the gel state to the water state? Why is that important for our health?
Well, okay, so you're asking a big question, not a little question, and I'm happy to answer. This requires a few steps because, but let me attempt to do it in a compressed time frame, because we don't have all day. And I guess okay. I'm trying to think of a way of explaining those 2-3 steps. Yeah, without confusing anybody. Okay.
Sure.
Why is it important? So, well, the first general statement about importance is, this is how it works. If you really want to understand how the body functions, you better know how this functions if it's really part of bodily function. So you need to know whether it's true or not true. That's the first point. And I argue it's true because the evidence is voluminous, and that book presents a good deal of the evidence. But I think what you're after is something more mechanistic. Yeah. And so, and here's the central point. So every one of your cells, I believe everyone, although I haven't counted, is filled with this kind of water. It's not ordinary water that fills the cell. And
Right.
and the way you can check this in a simple way is just cut yourself. If the cells were filled with liquid water, as soon as you cut yourself, that water would pour out. You'd have to clean the floor. You might even die if you lose all your water that way. But
Sure.
it's not what happens. The water stays in, and so it's more explainable if this water is gel-like and the gel sticks to the solids inside the cell. So then you don't lose your water. You may lose some blood because out of the capillaries flows this blood. So there you go. So the water starts, and in order for the cell to undergo this transition of proteins and water, it's called a phase transition. Physical chemists know it. It's nothing exotic at all. In order for it to happen, you first need, in the relaxed state, quiescent state, you need lots of structured water.
Right.
We call it fourth phase or easy water for reasons I can tell you. But it's there. And if you don't have enough of it, then your cells are not properly functioning. So in terms of health, in terms of function, you got to make sure that you have enough water. In other words, you have to make sure you're hydrated. And hydration is nothing new for you or for, I think, your listeners. Everybody knows. You play 2 rounds of tennis and you've had it unless you drink some water. Yep. And you drink the water, and some of it, not all, gets converted into the easy water that replenishes what's missing in your dehydrated cells. Sometimes you don't even feel the dehydration, and you've got plenty of energy once again. So it's really important for you to retain a full complement of this kind of water to remain functional and healthy. And that's where it starts. And there are a half dozen or so expedients that I can suggest offhand. If you want me to talk about that,
please, yeah,
that can build the water, and they're simple ones. They're not complicated ones, and they don't involve pharmaceuticals or anything like that. They're simple. So okay, so let me go down the list of. I hope I can count. I hope I can. Okay, number 1 is the most obvious one. Drink water, because what you do is you drink water, and then as you drink the water, some of that water gets converted into easy water.
Okay.
And I must digress for a moment because what you need to build that water is something I haven't talked about, and that is energy to build it. And so the question is, well, where does the energy come from? And we did experiments, and we found out, and to nobody's surprise, except maybe mine, because we couldn't figure out the answer for a long time, the answer is light. And it's not necessarily, or it's not visible light, nor is it UV light, it's infrared light at the long end of the spectrum. And when you drink the water, you've got plenty of infrared light or infrared energy. It comes from metabolism that generates heat, which is largely equivalent to infrared energy. And as long as you got that happening inside of you, it radiates out and builds the easy water in all the cells around you.
Okay.
You also get it from outside. Everything is generating infrared light. People don't realize that. They think it comes from like the toaster that's on heat, orange color, and that's generating lots of infrared. But if you were to turn off all the lights in your room and shut the curtains and such, see nothing with your eyes or with your smartphone camera. If I came with an infrared camera, that is an ordinary camera with an infrared sensor, I'd get a beautiful image because the microphone, the fan in the background, the lamp, the pictures, whatever, everything is generating infrared, so it's always there. Okay, so that's number 1, the obvious. Drink water. It gets converted through infrared energy, building EZ. Okay, next one is juicing. So drink water from those plants that are freshly growing in your backyard. And what does this do? Why does it work? Well, think about what you're doing. You're taking plants with fresh leaves that have just sprung up.
Yep.
They're not old with, gray hair or whatever. They're new and they're fresh. And what you're doing is squeezing out, essentially, the water from inside the plant cell. And that water is filled with EZ. It's fresh, new cells. And you basically put it through some kind of mashing machine, which is, as you know, purchasable.
Yep.
And you drink the juice that comes out. Of course, you have to improve the flavor a little with some strawberries or something to make it palatable. But you're drinking EZ water. See? And so that EZ water goes directly in, and just like the water you drink, but even better, more effectively, it builds EZ water. And if you require EZ water for function, then by all means, this should help. And
sure.
what I've heard from health practitioners is the patient comes, and it really doesn't matter what the issue is. They start drinking or start juicing. And what I've heard, this is anecdotal, they come back and whatever issue it was that was plaguing them has improved or in some cases disappeared. And as a side product, they lose weight, which almost everybody likes to do for some reason. Yeah. So, and some people argue and say, you can't, it doesn't really work because that water is negatively charged. The water inside the cell, by the way, I didn't talk about it, is negatively charged. And in fact, I think it's the negatively charged water that's responsible for the negative charge that people measure inside of cells. That's a side issue. I'm happy to talk about it. We can come back to it if you like.
Sure,
it's a
sure.
very simple explanation. It doesn't require channels and pumps. I've written about that, and I think the current view is not correct, and I can explain why if you ask me after I finish.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Well, we come back to it because
yes, that sounds good.
I get sidetracked. I think it's important. It's really important.
Sure.
If the water that you drink has net negative charge, it might be neutralized by the acid positive charge, protons in your stomach. But it shouldn't be the case because the amount of acid you have in the stomach is very small. And so if you drink a substantial amount of the water, the neutralization is not going to take place. Okay, so I've started with two of them. Third one is which one should I? Oh yeah, certain substances. Let me just make a little note here so I don't forget. Certain substances that have been known since Ayurvedic times to be good for health. So that's like 3,500 years ago, and we have a tendency to think those people as being primitive, and their ideas 3,500 years ago. What did they know? They don't know anything. No pharmaceutical companies, no internet, even, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there's a lot of wisdom back there that we don't give nearly as much credit for. So there were certain herbs that they knew were good for health, like turmeric, for example.
Yep.
Holy basil, another one, etc. Ghee, for example.
Okay.
We tested all of those to see whether they might actually build EZ water. Because remember, the theme is it possible that having a full complement of EZ water is a necessary condition for good health? So, and if you're sick, you might be losing some of that water for various reasons. So we decided to test to see whether it was the case. We tested each of half dozen, by now 7 or 8 different substances known to promote health. And every one of them we found in small concentrations that would be comparable to what you might have in your body. Okay. Every one of them built EZ water, and we published that. Yeah, so it means if we're right, I always like to, preface it, because as it was Carl Sagan, I think, who said that, you can have the most beautiful theory, but it takes only one ugly fact to destroy it. So you never know.
Exactly.
You can profess anything, but you know, most theories eventually get proved wrong. So I always want to hedge on that. But you know, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Sure.
So many of these substances now, and poison, by the way, we check glyphosate as a representative, weed killer.
Yeah. What'd you find with that?
It never increased. It just decreased the amount of easy water.
That would make sense. That's what I would guess.
Yeah. Well, we thought that might be the case too.
Sure.
Yeah. So we're actually eager to test other poisons to see. It may be that this is a general rule. We don't know yet because we haven't tested any. That many of the poisons could act by basically kicking out the water that's needed for function. It's a possibility, but
sure.
Sometimes I'm a little reluctant because the young students in the lab, I'm a little hesitant to expose them, unnecessarily to any poisons unless they really know what they're doing.
Sure.
Okay. Anyway, so that's number 3. Number 4. I live in Seattle. Where do you live?
I'm in Chicago.
Chicago. Okay, so you get more sun than we do.
A little bit.
In the wintertime here, here in the winter in Seattle, where I live, if you look outside, as right now, it's all clouds. It's gray. And some people get depressed. For some reason, I don't, but some do.
Sure.
And and when the sun comes out, suddenly they feel okay. They feel good.
Yep.
So why do they feel good? Well, one possible reason why they feel good could be psychological. Being in the dark and suddenly there's light.
Yep.
And I don't mean to suggest that explanation is incorrect, but there could be another explanation, and that is the sun's energy, 50% approximately, is infrared energy. So when the sun comes out, your body is exposed to infrared energy,
right.
And that hits your entire body. It can even go through clothing. Some wavelengths go through the clothing, and
interesting.
It reaches your body. So your body gets sunshine, it gets infrared energy, it builds EZ, and you feel good. It could happen to your head as opposed to any part of your body.
Sure.
So that brings me to number 4, and number 4 is getting a heavy dose of infrared, and that's from a sauna. And probably you have an infrared one sitting in one of your rooms, but I've enjoyed the traditional kind, both in Finland and in Russia.
Yep.
And let me tell you how powerful. But the point is that it's heat. It doesn't matter whether it's a moist sauna or one that's dry. It doesn't matter. You're getting infrared energy, and for the same reason that I was suggesting that sun's infrared energy makes you feel better.
Yep.
This is in spades. You're getting it. So I remember one experience. It was after a symposium in Finland. I was jet lagged. I was tired. I'd just given my talk. And they bussed us all from the hotel to some party place where they offered a nice dinner for a few hundred people who were attending. And boy, was I dead. I finished my meal. All I wanted to, it was like 10 o'clock. I was tired. All I wanted to do was get back to the hotel and go to sleep.
Yep.
So someone finally got up the microphone and made an announcement. And I was absolutely sure that this guy was saying, okay, the buses are loading. Everybody go back to their hotels, get some sleep. But that wasn't true. He said, okay, it's 10 o'clock now. The sauna, as they pronounce it correctly, the sauna is opening. And you got 3 choices. You got the moist one, you got the dry one, and then there was another. I can't remember exactly. And so I figured, okay, I'll try it. So I went in, and 20, 30 minutes later, I'm out. And I got to tell you, I felt like I'd had 8 hours sleep. It was the morning.
Wow.
My head was awake, alive. I could have given another symposium, another talk.
This was just 20 minutes in the sauna?
That's all. It was enough. Have you done it?
I've been in a sauna before. It's been a while. And just hearing that makes me want to get back into one.
Oh, it's really, really great.
Is it because they have high levels of infrared light? What is it with the sauna?
Well, it's the heat. See, the heat is essentially equivalent to infrared energy, or
Got
I
it. So
should
it
really
matches.
say, I should really say that infrared energy, which is more fundamental, is usually taken as equivalent to heat. It's not exactly, but it's close enough.
Got it.
In the book that we haven't mentioned, it's the fourth phase of water. I have a chapter on that. The idea of temperature actually can mislead, but
Sure.
but they're similar. So you get a lot of it in the sauna,
Got
or
it.
in Russia in the so-called banya, which the Russians enjoy as much as the Finns, I think.
Sure.
So that's now there's a sixth one, and let me finish with that, and then you got a lot more questions.
Yes.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, you're okay.
Yeah, well, okay. And that is earthing, or as we say, grounding. In Chicago, you ground something, you don't earth it, but the rest of the world, they earth it.
Uh-huh.
So what does that do? Well, first of all, it's well known that if you connect yourself to the earth, you feel better. And there's a lot of biophysics on it right now. It's commercialized. Some companies are selling gadgets where you can electrically connect yourself to the earth, and you can actually connect your non-conducting leather soles to the earth by putting a metal plug in that also you can buy. So at any rate, a lot of people are doing it, and a lot of people are enjoying health benefits from it. And why is that? Well, if you look on the internet and read, you'll find myriad explanations, and a lot of them are speculative. So let me add my own.
Please.
I think, it's simple, and it follows along the same route of building easy water. So we know that, well, first of all, if you connect yourself to the earth electrically, you can do that in many ways. You can walk barefoot on the beach near the water where it's conducting somewhat, or immerse yourself in the salt water, or in a mud bath, or hug a tree. Some people do that.
Sure.
There are many ways to. And as a kid, I was once buried in the sand up to my neck. And I was, I think, 8, 9 years old, or 10 years old, and it was fun. My friends did it, and it was time to go home, and I didn't want to go home because it felt so good, just like walking barefoot on the beach.
Yep.
It really felt. I could remember the distinct feeling. I don't remember so much from that era, but I remember that.
Sure.
Of course, I never thought of it. But what does that do? So if you connect yourself to the earth, you're connecting yourself to basically an almost infinite supply of negative charge. Now, a lot of people don't know that the earth is negatively charged. And I didn't know that the earth was negatively charged. I began my career studying as an undergraduate electrical engineering. No professor ever told me that when you take the plug and plug it into the receptacle, that third prong is being connected to a vast sea of negativity. It was always zero, ground, nothing. And it was a Russian colleague who was working in my lab for 6 months, a creative guy, who said to me on his way out, or about to go to the airport to take his plane back to Moscow after 6 months, he started talking about the Earth's electric field. So I said, Andre, you're crazy. You mean magnetic field, right? And maybe Andre was a little crazy, very creative guy, just a little, and some brilliance. So Andre said, no, it's electric field. Don't you know about the Earth's electric field? No, tell me. He said, well, the ionosphere up there is positively charged and the Earth is negatively charged. So in between those two, running vertically at right angles to the surface of the Earth, you have an electric field. The lines are running in this direction. It's 100 volts per meter at the surface of the Earth, which is like if I were standing, the potential difference between my nose and my toes would be 200 volts. So I went home after he left, and I'm shaking my head. This couldn't be. I mean, how could it be that 4 years studying electrical engineering, and then graduate school, and it's impossible.
Sure.
And the next morning, one of my students convinced me. So he brought me the lectures of the great Richard Feynman, the Nobel physicist, who was many considered to be the hero, the most prominent physicist, the Einstein of the second half of the 20th century, a hero of many. And he gave lectures at Caltech, and somebody put them into print. And the student brought me Volume 2, Chapter 9, and there was a whole chapter citing the evidence for the Earth's negativity.
Wow.
So it means when you connect yourself to the Earth, you're not connecting yourself to zero. You're connecting yourself to a vast sea of negativity. So it means that inside your body, if some cells are not so negative, by connecting yourself electrically, the electrons will run into your body. And we know from our experiments in the lab that if you add electrons to water, the H2O gets converted into the fourth phase water, the structured water that we discovered.
Sure.
So I think bottom line is the reason why you feel good, better, more healthier, and perhaps increased longevity. I don't know, if you connect yourself to the Earth, because you're acquiring negative charge, and that negative charge is really important for creating the structured fourth phase water that fills your cells.
Yes.
So I think I'll stop at that point because I know you got other questions.
That was fantastic. I'm so happy you mentioned everything you just did, especially with sun exposure and infrared light, and then the idea of grounding ourselves, so we're connecting ourselves to Earth. I practiced that a little bit today when I was out with my dog. I could just feel going outside into the sun, and we're in November in Chicago. Like you said, we probably get a little bit more sunshine than you do in Washington.
Yeah.
But we are now, entering that season of life where there's gonna be a little bit less sun exposure.
A little bit less. Yeah.
So you can just kind of feel it when you go outside, and you can just feel when you have that sun hitting your face. You just feel better. And I also took off my shoes and just kind of walked along the grass in the park across the street. And I'm already aware of that idea, but I'm happy you shared that as well.
Well, you look so healthy, and I guess it's
working. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That's good feedback. Would you say that idea of connecting ourselves to Earth and to nature, is that more important now in the 21st century when we have higher exposures of EMFs, to kind of offset that positivity and negativity?
Well, totally. I mean, there are so many factors that are acting together to impair our health. Shocking. And of course, EMF is part of that. All of the chemtrails are part of that. The particulate aluminum that is settling on the Earth and that we imbibe whenever we drink water or eat food, and life is it that's used. All of the above. If people are ready to open their eyes and listen to some of the evidence instead of dismissing as some kind of conspiracy theory, and look at the evidence and make judgment, there are too many things that are impacting our lives. So most of us are sick, not the way we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be thriving, but many of us are sick with chronic issues. So the question is how much some of these factors will improve our life, increase our longevity. It's not so easy to answer that question because you got to wait for evidence and check and see what happens.
Yeah.
But you're right on with
Good.
that.
So I know you've covered so many fascinating topics. I do feel like maybe I haven't gotten to some of your core work, which is around water and easy water. I know you have discussed it throughout our conversation, but perhaps I didn't give you an opportunity to explain that finding of the fourth phase. We know of the three different phases that, we've known for a very long time, but tell us more about that finding of the fourth phase of water.
Sure. This is the central feature that leads to so many applications, both in health and in nature,
Sure.
and even in technology. We started with the idea of Gilbert Ling, that the water molecules are all lined up, which is like a crystal.
Yep.
Right. So what about crystals? Well, crystals are usually pure, which means that before crystallization, any impurities that happen to be there get excluded and shifted out. And so, based on Gilbert Ling's hypothesis or evidence, we were looking for some preparation where we could see that molecules and particles would be excluded. And we found it actually pretty quickly by some quirk. We were fortunate. So it was in a chamber, and in the chamber we had a gel, and we put water right next to the gel, and we added little particles, and we noticed that right next to the gel there was a region that excluded the particles. So we look in the microscope and we see particles all over the water except in this region right next to the gel. And we didn't know at the moment, but we thought maybe this is a region where the water molecules are somehow ordered or organized. And so we've been finding it with not only with various materials, same result. And a colleague from Australia said you should give it a name, otherwise, you have to go through a long, elaborate explanation. And he said a good name would be exclusion zone, because it excludes. And one advantage of that is the abbreviation for exclusion zone, EZ.
Yep.
Easy to remember, or easy. But it doesn't work all over, because while we call that last letter Z, most everybody else calls it Z. So if you're in Europe, it's not as convenient. But anyway, So we call this water, which later we found out had most interesting properties. We called it EZ water. Later we called it fourth phase because it looked like a different phase of water. So what are the properties? Well, so one is that typically it forms when water meets a hydrophilic surface. Hydrophilic meaning water-loving, which means if you drop some droplets on a surface, they spread out because the material loves the water and it wants to get in contact as much as possible, as opposed to hydrophobic, like Teflon, where the water beads up. So we found that this grows. And early on, we found also that it's not neutral. See, water is neutral. H2O is neutral. And we expected this to be neutral, as Gilbert Ling has suggested. But the experiments using very tiny electrodes, in fact, electrodes invented by the same Gilbert Ling, for which he should have gotten the Nobel Prize, because so many people use them afterward to get their Nobel Prizes. We used that, and we found that this region, this exclusion zone, was typically negatively charged. And the region beyond, the region of ordinary water beyond this zone, was positively charged. And that occurred because the water molecules split. Sort of like the first step in photosynthesis, where light comes, splits the water molecule into H plus and OH minus. So it's very similar. And so we found that these OH minuses gathered right next to the hydrophilic surface, and they began building this exclusion zone. And we found that as they did this, that the positives, the H pluses, are kicked out into the water beyond the limit of growth. See, so it means the easy water that we measure, and that's inside your body, is typically negatively charged, and you get rid of as much as possible the positive charges, and you do that mostly by breathing, because you're breathing out protons. You're actually, if you measure with litmus paper, you can see that the breath is acidic. You breathe out water, CO2, right, and the pH is it's carbonic acid whose pH is low. So you get rid of those positive charges and you retain the negative stuff. Anyway, we found that the easy water typically is negatively charged. And to build it, you need to split water molecules. But splitting water molecules requires energy. So where does that energy come from? Well, that's what I mentioned. It took us a couple of years to figure out that it's light, and it's infrared light. And it happened with an undergraduate student who was doing what he was not supposed to do. He had a chamber, the chamber is sitting on a bench, and he's looking at exclusion zones in the way that I just mentioned. And right next to him was sitting a gooseneck lamp. He picks up the lamp, shines it on the chamber, and he sees that in the region that was illuminated, that the exclusion zone grew.
Wow.
Appreciably, not 10%, but like 300%.
Wow.
And so he calls me over, take a look, and I'm astounded. So I said, well, why don't you remove the lamp? And sure enough, this zone retracted back to its original. So, I'd like to say it did take a rocket scientist to figure out that, light is building this. So light seems to supply the energy that's responsible for doing it. So anyway, there are a few things, just to summarize the features of this kind of water. Number one, it's ordered. And we found that the kind of ordering is not like soldiers lining up. It's sheet-like. And so next to this hydrophilic surface is one sheet that forms from water next to the material surface, and it has a hexagonal honeycomb structure with oxygens and hydrogen. And then the next layer builds from that first layer, or it builds on that first layer. And the third layer builds on the second layer, and the layers build up, and they can build up to essentially 1 million layers. We found under the right circumstances, they keep building. So you have a layered hexagonal structure. Hexagonal structures are common in nature. It comes from the splitting of water molecules. It has negative charge, and it builds from infrared light. Those are the main features of the water that we're talking about. So it means that the same principle should hold for the water that's in your cells.
Yeah. Super interesting. Forgive me if you've already covered on this. I just want to make sure I clarify for our audience. Can you tell us a little bit more about the linkage between health and wellness and the fourth phase of water, easy water?
Yeah. So it's every one of your cells is filled with this negative charge. Let me start with that. I mentioned earlier that I think the theory that this somehow involves pumps and channels is not correct. And I won't take the time to go over the evidence, but it appears in those two books, in the Cells and Gels book and the Fourth Phase of Water, the later book, which contains much of the information that I'm talking about now. And so if it's really true that your cell is not only filled with this kind of water, but that the water has negative charge, and that negative charge explains why measurements show that cells are negative charge, typically between minus 50 to minus 100 millivolts. Pretty much every one of your cells is minus 60, minus 70. Now, if it's true that water is important for health, it must mean that sick cells may have that if you have a cell with less of that water, it shouldn't be functioning properly. So I looked at the evidence about the kinds of cells that are not functioning properly, and the first one that everybody would come to is cancer cells. So sure enough, I looked back 60 years when it was popular to make these measurements. Sure enough, the cancer cells, instead of having an electrical potential of minus 60, minus 70, minus 80, it's minus 10 or minus 15.
Wow.
Suggesting that, suggesting that in the cancer cells, which, are pretty much non-differentiated, not as many surfaces to build this water, sure enough, it doesn't have the water, and therefore or not therefore, but is not functioning as cells should function. See,
Incredible.
so yeah, well, and I checked. Besides the cancer cells, I could find, quick search. I'm lazy. Kidney cells, pathological kidney cells, exactly the same. Minus 15, minus 20, minus 10. Something is dreadfully wrong in those pathological cells. So this is, you might say, indirect evidence to suggest that you really do need a full complement of this kind of water in order to maintain your health.
Yeah.
And I've given you a half dozen examples of how you can build easy water, and by expedients that do demonstrably build your health.
Sure.
And the essence of it is that, you need that water. The water is converted into gets converted into ordinary water, and that's when the cell does its thing, and then it gets converted back again. But if you don't have enough energy or whatever to get it converted back again to the initial state, you don't have that initial state, and the cell can't do what it's supposed to do. Yep. So that's a kind of thumbnail of why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. I've learned so much from you today, Jerry, and I think right after our call here, I'm going to be hopping on Amazon or wherever your books are sold to look at your book, The Fourth Phase of Water, because I feel like we just scratched the surface in our conversation.
Yeah, the reviews have been really gratifying on Amazon.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that being said, I understand you have an upcoming book that you're launching soon. Do you want to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, I say it in a blasé way, but I'm really excited about it. So, in writing about water, and during the discussion today, I hope I've transmitted the information that electrical charge, is very important in everything involving health. Well, a lot of people know that already in terms of action potentials and electrical potentials of cells and such, but it goes way beyond that. And the book describes how it goes way beyond. So the book tackles issues in nature that are not well understood. We think we understand them, but if you go beyond the surface, you see that quickly that you don't really understand them. An example is bird flying. So if I were to ask you how birds fly, probably you'd say, oh, they flap their wings, right? And that's the standard response. But now we go one step deeper and say, well, okay, that's terrific. Sounds reasonable, but I can look out my window, and I actually can, and do that on a daily basis because I have a lovely view of Lake Washington from my home.
Nice.
And there's an eagle's nest nearby. And the eagles take off, and they may flap occasionally, but mostly they don't flap their wings. But they fly perfectly well, and they fly against the wind, with the wind, right angles to the wind. Yep. Sometimes they fly level, sometimes they descend a little bit, sometimes they ascend a little bit, and they're not flapping their wings. So your answer that they flap their wings can only be a partial answer. There must be something more fundamental than that. And okay, so the book develops and adduces evidence to demonstrate that it's actually charge that's important to keep the birds aloft. And, I don't, it takes a couple of chapters to do that, so I won't attempt to do it. But it's much more than just birds. It's what makes the earth turn, for example. Yeah. How come we have a 24-hour day? It must be some energy that does it. Where does it come from? What keeps the clouds up in the sky? They're made of water, and if you were to climb using a ladder to the same height as the clouds, you took your pail of water, turned it over, it dumped down like a waterfall. But the clouds don't do that. They stay up. Why do they stay up? What causes wind, for example? And what about gravitation? Is it really that two masses attract one another? Well, everybody thinks so, but when you start with that hypothesis, you wind up with a half dozen serious anomalies, things that don't fit. Right. And, so is it really is it really the mass, the two masses? Why should two masses attract each other? Or is it the charges that are within those masses? So that gives a kind of thumbnail of the kinds of things that are discussed in the book.
I love that.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'm excited for it, just hearing about it. Do you have a release date on that yet?
No, my own part
it's in the works.
My own part is almost done.
Okay.
I do a lot of editing with editors and myself multiple times to make it readable.
Sure.
I want everything to be readable and interesting. But my son is the artist, and in fact, my son is a professional artist, a sculptor, in fact. And he told me one day, some time ago, that he wants to illustrate my next book.
Cool.
And that was the fourth phase book. And so many people have commented because the artwork is brilliant. It's full of cartoons that he's conceived and drawn. And the problem is that he's now working as the general contractor on remodeling his own house.
Very good.
Yeah, well, it's not very good because it takes a lot of time.
It does take a lot of time, yeah.
So I'm waiting for him. So therefore, it's going to be 9 months from now or something like that.
Okay, good. Well, we'll be looking
it's almost
for that.
There.
Great.
Sure.
Yeah, very exciting.
Okay. Yeah, so please, you should check out the fourth phase book.
Yes.
It's very, very popular on Amazon.
Yeah, and I genuinely say that I'm interested in learning more about all of your work, and I do think we have scratched the surface with this conversation. There's so much more out there that you have discovered and you talk about. So hopefully my audience too is equally as excited as I am.
Well, thank you, Dan. I'm flattered by your kind words. I really appreciate that. For me, it's just excitement. To try to find truth. Yeah.
Yes. One final question I do have for you, Jerry, if you have another moment. And also, if you'd like to send anybody to learn more about your work, I understand you have a website. Where can people learn a little bit more about your work?
The website is probably a good place. Besides the fourth phase book, the website, absolutely. And I don't have the URL offhand.
Sure.
I can send it to you if you want to.
I'll be sure to link everthing up in the show notes for those that are watching
that'd be
or listening.
Great. Yeah, or if
in
not,
the description.
Just Google under my name, Pollack, Gerald Pollack Laboratory, and you probably can find it.
Perfect. That sounds great. And then I do have one final question for you: is who do you want to impact the most with the work that you do?
Actually, I would like to leave a lasting impact. We have a lot of problems in the world today, and there's been an emphasis or a questioning of the merit of finding truth, as we all know from a political situation. And I think science is getting a bad name because of that, at least among 50% of our population. For me, it's difficult to understand that because without truth, there's no justice, there's nothing that we need to live on.
Sure.
So, in terms of finding truth, I would like to be there. I would hope that some of these rather fundamental ideas that I have come up with, I tell you, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, because so much of that comes from people who came before me. But I certainly would like to impact the world in the future with a sense that this guy has made a real attempt to find ground truth. And I hope that it can be found, and particularly for your audience of people dealing with longevity. I hope some of these principles can accelerate the move toward gaining longevity. Sometimes people reach 100 years old and they say, "I've had it; it's enough." But other people, want to keep going because they have a lot to contribute. So that's a great question. I really appreciate that, and
absolutely.
I hope my answer is cogent.
No, I appreciate your answer. I appreciate your work, and you are bringing something and furthering science in a way that not a lot of people are doing. So I love your answer of truth, and I hope you can just continue with that mission. So thank you, Jerry.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
I appreciate it. You have a good one.
Okay, take care.
Thanks.